Hello and welcome to another very special podcast episode of Superheroes of Arabia. I'm joined today by someone who is very important from the world of gaming. He has a lot of contributions, a lot of achievements under his hat, and he was kind enough to visit Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, and Jeddah in the last year multiple times. I had the honor of meeting him during the Red Sea International Film Festival during a discussion panel that was about the future of the interactive gaming with focus on Saudi Arabia and much of the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mike Fisher.
Hi, everybody.
So, before I proceed with my questions and my discussion with Mr. Fisher, I would just like to tell each and every one of you that Mr. Fisher has been involved with very popular gaming properties such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Halo, Tomb Raider, and Fortnite. Plus, he is also a part time angel investor. He is also providing consultancies to various companies around the world who are intending to get into the world of gaming, especially when it comes to augmented reality and so forth. So, Mr. Fisher, on behalf of the community, I would like to thank you once again. And I would like to start out with my first question. Who is Mike Fisher, the person? And
Thank
how
you.
did he get into the gaming industry?
Thank you. Thank you for the very generous introduction as well. So, I mean, at my heart, I really am just someone who has always loved comic books and video games, like you,
Thank you.
and always had dreams of making that my career. So, I'm most of all a very lucky person because I've had the good fortune to be able to do what I wanted to do. I remember my parents telling me, Mike, you waste all of your time playing video games and reading comic books. How are you ever going to uh, be able to survive and to support yourself when you grow up if you don't get more serious about life? And but the fact of the matter is, those are my joys in life. The stories and comic books were my inspiration, and video games were something that brought me so much joy and brought me together with my friends. As I looked at university, I felt like I had three choices: a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And so I picked engineer by process of elimination.
Right.
And I very quickly realized I wasn't going to be a good engineer. I didn't like engineering. And at that time, almost everybody from my program went into defense, went into the military industrial complex. I was an electronic engineering major. So I decided I wanted to do the opposite of the path I was headed. I wanted to do something with my life that brought joy to people. And to me, that was toys and games. So I changed my major of studies from engineering to economics. And
Right.
I wrote my senior thesis as a econometric modeling of average revenue in the toy and games business. So I wanted to work in either toys or games from age 19. And in fact, also at age 19, I made a very foolish choice. I actually got a Batman tattoo on my shoulder, which
Oh
I
boy.
still have.
Awesome.
So that's how strong my love of comics and my love of games was.
I see.
Uh, by the way, I got that tattoo of Batman in 1989. So my guess is it's older than you.
Uh, Not exactly, sir, because I'm 45. I was born in
Okay, good.
79. I'm the last
Okay,
of the Gen X.
there you go. Well, then you're still old enough to understand. So, but here's the problem.
Right.
I wanted to work in games,
Right.
but Atari had crashed. Nintendo was just getting started, and there was no hope for me. So, in order to follow my dreams, I became an immigrant. I moved to Japan. I
Okay.
bought a one-way ticket to Tokyo
Right.
because I didn't have enough money for a round trip ticket. And in 19 no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got my tattoo in 1985 because I went to Japan in 1988.
Right.
I taught English for 2 years, and I knocked on the door of every game company and every toy company you can imagine. And somehow I just got lucky enough in 1990, Sega was hiring entry-level people to help them grow their international sales department.
Right.
So in 1990, April 1st, I joined Sega and started at the bottom level. And little by little, Sega gave me the opportunity to learn about the business, to improve my Japanese language skills.
Right.
And eventually I was promoted into management. I was sent to Sega of America. And I stayed at Sega for 7 years before I moved on. And then I've stayed in the games business ever since. I even went back to Sega later for 2 more years to help them transition from Dreamcast. I've stayed in the industry and I've loved it. And as you pointed out, I've had the chance to work with some of the most wonderful IP in the world and visit so many incredible places around the world to meet my fellow gamers, my fellow tribe,
Right.
including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has been just a joy for me to visit several times in this past year.
It has been a pleasure for us to be welcoming you to our country. Before I start with your journey with Sega, because that remains a very important part for pop culture and gaming community in Saudi Arabia itself. I just want to remind the viewers, the older ones who are the Gen Xers like me, that the amount of struggle we had to go through just to pursue our passion, because in Saudi Arabia, in much of the Asian world, it was roughly the same thing unless you were in Japan.
Yeah.
You had engineering, doctor. We weren't too much concerned about lawyers, but in our part of the world, it was you're either an engineer or you're either a doctor in order to be successful in.
Yeah.
And what you had to hear from your parents, me and many like me, we just grew up with that banter. Uh, and I still do, because my mom recently gave me an earful about collecting action figures. So that's relatable. Now, sir, you mentioned that you started at the very bottom of Sega while you were in Japan. That was basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the launch pad of your career as a gaming
Very much.
professional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you involved with Sonic the Hedgehog from the very beginning? What other properties did you get the chance to work on? Because Metal Gear
Sure.
Solid also made a debut on Sega.
Yeah. So I think it's important to point out that I'm not myself a creative person.
Right,
And I'm not an engineer, right? I've always worked on the business side. And I've seen my job from almost the first day as helping the creative people to achieve their full creative potential
right,
through being the person who translates the business world.
right,
So for me, I've often worked across cultures, right? I eventually did become fluent in Japanese, so I did a lot of work between Japan and the US. And I always felt like the culture gap between Japan and the West was not as big as the culture gap between the Japanese and the Japanese engineers and even the Japanese business people. That
wow,
sorry, the creative and the business world were farther apart because Japanese engineers and European engineers are the same heart, right? Japanese creators and American creators are the same heart, but the business side and the creative and engineering side can be different worlds. So the first products I worked on were actually the Mickey Mouse games, and
okay,
I had a chance to work with a wonderful team. A woman named Emiko Yamamoto was the lead of the three Disney games they made: a Mickey Mouse game, a Donald Duck game, and a Mickey and Donald game. She's still a friend of mine and still an incredibly talented person.
right,
And I did a lot of work with the licensed products. So with Disney, for example, I also worked with Ayrton Senna, the Formula One racer, for his
yes,
game. I
legend.
worked with Michael Jackson. I worked on the Michael Jackson Moonwalker games and got to
That
play
was a
video
big
games.
hit here. That was a big hit here.
Yeah, yeah, I got to play video games with Michael Jackson.
Wow.
I didn't get to work on a lot of superhero games, which I had always hoped to do. But if you think about it, Sega did not really do a lot of either Marvel games or DC games. Those are always done by other companies. So that was one of the things I had always hoped to be more involved with, but never quite had the chance to do.
Right.
Sonic was interesting. I think it was my first or my second year at Sega. The CEO sent a note down to say, we need a Mario killer.
Right.
I want every Sega employee to come up with an idea.
Okay.
And I didn't have any ideas. I thought about them. I just didn't have that talent. But as it so happened, a young guy named Naoto Oshima came up with these visual designs for Sonic and Dr. Robotnik. And they put together a dream team of the best creative people from every department within Sega to make this Sonic game. And so I was kind of there on the sidelines. I wasn't hands-on. I can't take any credit for its success, but it was amazing to watch it happen. And at first, especially Sega of America, they weren't so sure that it was going to be a hit
Right.
because hedgehogs were slow.
Mhm.
This thing was blue. Hedgehogs aren't blue. And the backgrounds of the game were built with polygons, but the main character looked like a cartoon. But
Right.
then once they saw the first prototype, everybody knew this was it. This was going to be what changed the world for us. So I got to be there and watch that happen and watch Sega go from, a loser company that no one really thought about to, for a little while, number one. Now, I do understand that Saudi Arabia is very much a PlayStation world,
Yep.
more than Xbox or a Sega world, but Sega was very kind to me, and all of the good fortune and success I've had was because of the opportunities that the people at Sega gave to me.
I wish you had the opportunity to visit Saudi Arabia in the 90s,
Oh, that
because
was beautiful.
Sega had thrown out Nintendo. Super Nintendo didn't 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 succeed over here. Uh, Panasonic had launched its 3DO, even though it was able to wow the audience, but it wasn't able to, maintain their customer base. And Sega continued until its, for the lack of a better word, demise, until PlayStation came in and Xbox came in, and the rest, as we all know, is history. So, from Sonic and Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, where does this lead Mike Fisher, the gaming professional?
So after about 5 years at Sega, I moved from Sega of Japan to Sega of America.
Right.
And I actually worked at Sega of America's toy division. They had a high-tech toy division for a while. It was a
Right.
really interesting team to work with. They did some amazing creative work. Um, and then at about the same time, the toy division started to struggle. And also, Sega came out with the Saturn, which was just a disaster.
Yes.
So I went to this CEO of Sega and I said, I think it's time for me to go.
Mhm.
Sega needs to get out of the hardware business.
Right.
You just cannot compete with the resources that are required to make a new hardware platform. You can't compete with Microsoft and Sony and these giants.
Right.
You should become a software company. I'm going to go work at a software publisher and understand and learn the business. And if you ever change your mind, I will be happy to come back and apply what I've learned. Because again, I worked with incredible people, folks like Tom Kalinske, the CEO of Sega of America. As I mentioned, Emiko Yamamoto, the creator of the Disney games. Just so much kindness and opportunity given me by Sega. So I went to Namco. It wasn't Bandai Namco yet. It was still Namco.
Namco. Okay.
And I was their head of marketing for the US. So I launched Tekken 3, Tekken Tag, Soul Calibur, several of the Ridge Racer games. It was a great experience. And then after 5 years, I got a phone call.
Okay.
Sega said, we're giving up the hardware. We're going to become a software only company.
Okay.
Would you come back? And I like to say jokingly, Sega's like the mafia. You can quit, but you can never leave. So I went back. I went back and I helped them transition from a hardware company to a software company. I had to go back to Nintendo and Sony, the people we've been fighting with, and ask for help because Sega was really struggling.
Right.
And at one point, we had an event where I took the Sonic character mascot to Nintendo, and a Mario mascot character was there waiting, and they hugged, and it was really touching.
I
Uh,
remember. I remember seeing that video clip.
Yep. And so at that point, I was vice president of entertainment marketing for Sega of America. So it was a more senior position. And again, I got to work with folks like the Sonic team and Yuji Naka and work with Yu Suzuki and Virtua Fighter. It was a very exciting time, but Sega still struggled. There was still that mentality that, hey, we were number one, and no one can tell us what to do. And the
Yeah.
world had changed, but Sega hadn't. And at that time, I worked for a gentleman named Peter Moore,
Mhm.
who was president of Sega of America. He went to Xbox, and I
Right.
followed him there. And we worked together. I first went back to Japan to sell Xbox in Japan, which was not easy.
Right.
And I came back to the US and we launched Xbox 360. And so I got to launch Halo 3, Gears of War. And I always seemed to be working for the challenger. And I think what was special for me about, especially really for all the companies, for Namco, for Sega, for Xbox, and then later for Square Enix and Epic, we're people who love games. Even the people who work in finance and accounting and the legal department, we love games. And it's a global culture, right? You and I grew up in different countries and different cultures. But when we sit down and we talk games, it's universal, it's global. And
Exactly.
I love the way that games bring people together.
They sure do, and I'll add to your point that for my higher studies, I ended up in Britain. So my classmates would be from all over the world, and they were from Malaysia, they were from China, they were uh, from Africa, from so many other places. But the only icebreaker we had, even though I was studying accountancy in Britain, the only icebreaker we had was the world of gaming. The moment my class fellows realized that this guy from Saudi Arabia is into video games, even though my preference is very limited when it comes to video games, they just became my friends. It was an instant. Okay, sir. Now, you have touched upon a great deal of history about the video gaming, and you have reached your tenure with Xbox. There is something I want to ask you because you've seen the Atari era and now you are in the modern era. What's the genre that you think has still survived the test of time? Because today we are talking about RPG gaming, we're talking about third person, we're talking about simple action and adventure. We have one of the most detailed oriented sports video games that are coming in. And there's a lot of money being invested in gaming competitions. One of your projects, Tekken, I'm sure you were proud to see that a Tekken tournament had taken place in Gamers 8 in Riyadh.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
So, what have you seen and what are you seeing right now for the future?
Well, certainly, I think the most wonderful evolution that I've seen has been the globalization of gaming. And one of my heroes is, I don't know if you know who Arslan Ash is, but he's a Tekken champion from Pakistan. And
Yes, yes, yes.
I've always wanted to meet him. I've never had the chance. And someone should make a movie about his story because it is so inspiring and so wonderful. And I would love to see the world know his incredible story. And I've heard wonderful things about him. But when I started in games were a toy, right? In
Mhm.
the United States, our number one retailer was Toys R Us. It was
Yes,
a kid tech toy. And now it is a respected artistic expression.
right.
It's a more profitable and influential media than movies or music or television. I think if you want to touch more lives today, a game will do that more than anything else. And of course, I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia understands that better than anyone, right? From the top national leadership to the gaming community. I think there's a real sense that the people of the Middle Eastern and North African region can tell their own story.
Yes.
In terms of evolution, I think that's the most interesting thing. As far as games go, it's really hard to say because there's still a lot of people who love to play the old school Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. And there are people who love games for the cinematic experience and the story they tell, like Last of Us.
Right.
Uh, and also, there are older people and middle-aged women who love playing Candy Crush on their mobile phone.
Yep.
So what's wonderful for me is just like how diverse and inviting games have become for everyone. And now what brings me the most joy is you're seeing multi-generational families, right? You're seeing kids and their parents play together.
Yes.
And, when I was young, my parents didn't want to listen to my music. They didn't read my comic books. They
Certainly.
didn't play my games. And today I think it's shared between parents and children, which is wonderful. I think that joy of play, whether you're playing Pong, Pac-Man, Ridge Racer, Halo, or Last of Us, that's the one thing that's been consistent.
That's the one thing that has been consistent. And for the future, you don't see any particular genre as the clear winner or taking the lead or something like that. I mean, like, because there's a lot
Yeah.
of talk about augmented reality gaming and all these things. But I mean, there is a significant amount of community that's there for every genre, and it's going to continue to grow.
What's interesting to me is not just the diversity of genres. By the way, my favorite game of all right now is Rocket League. But I
Rocket
don't even
League.
I don't even know if there's a name for that genre, right? It's not a racing game, it's not a sports game. I don't know what you call it. It's Rocket League. There's no other game like it.
Right.
Uh, but I always, I teach at the University of Southern California Games program. And I
Right.
always tell my students, don't just try to make a game that's successful in the current business environment. Try to think of an all new business model.
Right.
Because if you think about it, games started out putting coins into machines.
Yes.
And then you bought a machine that only played one game. And then they had cartridges that would play other games.
Right.
And then they had PC games where you could even download games. Some of
Right.
them were freeware, some of them you had to pay to play. And now we have microtransactions, subscription models. We still have the premium model. And what's wonderful is you can make the game you want and then choose the business model that fits it. The only place that's not really true is mobile. And I'm very frustrated with how many great games I see for mobile that can't become successful because they don't fit into that free to play microtransaction model.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing I'd like to see in the future games grow into is some way for people to fix that. Apple has Apple Arcade.
Mhm.
Netflix has their new Netflix games. So people are trying. But I really want to encourage folks who have dreams of making a game. Don't just think about fitting the status quo options, Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Android, Apple. Think of all new ways. Think of your idea first, and then invent the business model that fits it best.
Well put, sir. Well put. And uh, for the community that I represent, because and you yourself have acknowledged that you have been a lifelong comic book reader and a superhero fan yourself. With what has happened, I just want to take your thoughts on the fact that there was a time when superhero games were launched in Atari, the first being Superman and Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
Then came Sega. The X-Men game just went through the roof, but the second one didn't. A lot of Spider-Man games were launched. The Avengers game was launched on Sega and Super Nintendo. And then something happened that superhero games just went down the drain. The only success story that we saw was the Spider-Man video game, which was on PlayStation 1, but everybody else was just trying to find their way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, but now we are in the resurgence of superhero games. How much of that resurgence is actually owed to Batman Arkham Asylum?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or should we be crediting a game that had appeared before it, which was, but it didn't get the acknowledgement, the Ultimate Spider-Man game, which was the first open world superhero video game. I would like to know your thoughts on these.
Yeah, those are great questions. By the way, you mentioned the old Star Wars X-Men game. Do you remember the full title of the game? X-Men what?
The first video game?
Yeah, I think it was the first Sega X-Men game. Do you
Yeah,
remember the full?
we just knew X-Men. That's
It
it.
was called X-Men: The Clone Wars.
That's
And
the
then
second one. That's the
the
second one.
second one, there you go. Wow. So you know more than me. So the funny thing was later on when Star Wars wanted to make the Clone Wars,
Right.
Sega had the trademark and they actually had to come back to Sega and ask for permission, which Sega gave.
Wow.
Um, so I
Interesting.
do, I do remember, seeing that first Rocksteady Batman game was one of the most incredible experiences. I can only compare it to the first time I read the Batman, the Batman Rocksteady game, compared to me to reading Batman the Dark Knight the first time. It was just such an incredible step forward for the genre. It was so, I mean, there were so many bad Batman games
Yeah.
before Rocksteady started making them. But I think you're right. I think that first PlayStation Spider-Man game really was the first game that really felt like you were living in the comic book world. And then the Batman series took it forward. And then, of course, the new Spider-Man games from Insomniac have again borrowed from the Rocksteady Batman games. So they keep building on each other and they keep getting richer and deeper. But the thing that's interesting to me is the heroes that we all watch in the Marvel movies or the DC Comics movies and play in games. I mean, Batman and Superman were from the 1930s. The X-Men were from the 60s. There haven't really been a lot of new characters or new stories invented comic books in a long time. And I think it's kind of, for us, it's an older generation's media, whereas video games are the new comic books.
Yes.
And I think that I'm really interested to see these new generation of original stories that, the cyberpunk or Last of Us or Uncharted stories, or again, Halo is a TV series as well. So I think that just like reading comic books was something that influenced us in our youth, even more than the Spider-Man games or the Batman games or so on. I really think these original video games are what are going to inspire this next generation of creators.
I'll be asking you a very important question regarding the superhero experience. But before I do that, uh, with all the resources that are available right now, the interconnectivity that we find, I mean, when you had started your career, even for advanced societies, advanced countries like the United States and Japan, being interconnected was still a challenge.
Yeah, very much.
Why? Because you were, correct me if I'm wrong, the CEO of Square Enix. I don't
Square
know.
Enix American, yes. There was the subsidiary. I didn't run the global organization. I had a boss who lived in Tokyo.
I see. I see. So I don't know if this happened during your time with Square Enix, but I would like you to answer this after the break. The question is, why Marvel's Avengers, which was developed by Square Enix, why it didn't succeed despite having all the key elements? Now you can get all of your superhero stuff from Noon and Namshi, not only in Saudi Arabia but other countries of the GCC. All you need is to use my promo code SOJ1 on both Noon and Namshi. But remember, my Noon code works only for cashbacks in Saudi Arabia and UAE, whereas my Namshi code works for the entire GCC region. So you're looking for superhero t-shirts, you're looking for action figures, you're looking for accessories, anything you name it, you can get it straight up from Noon and Namshi. And the best part about it is you either get cashback or you get good discounts. We're back from our break, and Mr. Fisher, if you would like to elaborate on the question I had for Square Enix missed opportunity, Marvel's Avengers.
Sure. Please call me Mike. Everyone calls me Mike. I thought a lot about this because at the time I was at Square Enix, we launched Deus Ex Human Revolution, And, I have really mixed feelings about it because it was a great game that I think could have been a lot better. And it was frustrating for me because it was such an incredibly talented team, but they were so focused on their creative vision, sometimes they lost track of the greater goal, right? For example, the beginning of the game was just impossibly hard, right? Our best testers couldn't finish the first few levels. And when we gave the feedback to the team, they just didn't want to listen. We fought hard over the ending of the game as well, which is a story for another day. So I always saw them as a team that with the right leadership and the right focus could make the best game in the world. I mean, they had that much talent, but they just didn't have a lot of what I'll call creative discipline.
Right.
So like when I heard that the idea was to make a Marvel licensed game, like I was really excited because my feeling was that the Marvel license and sort of the creative world that you had to work within would give them the focus that they needed to make a commercially successful game, but
Right.
would still give them creative freedom to really do something special and unique. Um, and I think Guardians of the Galaxy did well, but the
Yes.
creative, or at least in terms of reasons, but the Avengers game didn't. And when I think about why, I'll go back to an experience I actually had at Epic Games. So if you think about Epic Games, they had traditionally made, a shooter like Unreal or a game like Gears of War.
Right.
Fortnite was always planned as a games as a service, which Epic had no experience in, and I really had no experience in. But by the time I joined Epic Games, and I left Amazon because I believed in Fortnite, so I really was all in. But Tencent was a 40% owner of Epic at that time, and they really taught us a lot. And it was really interesting. Even though I worked on the publishing side, I wasn't a developer. I had a chance to learn from Tencent's way of making games. And what I learned is when they make a game as a service, they will work on it and refine it, sometimes for years and years. So the game is essentially finished, right? But they will continue to tweak different elements of difficulty level and rewards and progression until they see the internal metrics on retention and engagement is really what they need it to be. And again, it's a very expensive commitment and it's a long-term commitment, but the key is not to release those games as a service experiences until they know that it's everything that it can be. And of course, they also have that pipeline of follow-up content to keep users engaged for the long term. Whereas, Square Enix was accustomed to, the big release date and you launch the game and then you watch it go and maybe release some DLC. So I think that with a little bit more patience and a little bit more time to build a better pipeline of long-term content and to sort of have tweaked it, it would have been better. But I think they fell into that mindset of the old blockbuster release date rather than thinking of it as a long-term service.
That I think I can disagree with you on that because as a gamer, I went out of my way just to get a copy of Marvel's Avengers, and initially the repetitive tasks were frustrating me, but I was motivated because I hadn't defeated MODOK yet.
Hmm.
The moment I defeated MODOK and I started to go into the DLCs and all these, I was really surprised. I said, I mean, you have an entire 60-year history of the Avengers right in front of you. There were so many villain-centric DLCs that you could have launched and the gaming community could have been excited for, but you just simply let it go on the sides. And that is my feedback as a gamer itself. But now you touched upon something really interesting about the experience that video games are now providing. I mean, it's the whole comic book experience. I loved that term when you said that. And I asked you this question before when we met during the discussion panel, but for my audience, I want to ask it now. Have comics overtaken every other medium that used to be successful in launching a new character? because in the 80s it was either the animated series or the comic books. If you go back to the 60s, it was all comic books.
Yeah.
So is it right to say that if anyone wants to launch a new character, they have to take the video games route?
I mean, I do think so. Although I'm interested in some of the folks who are sort of thinking about the video game and the comic book at the same time.
Yeah.
And we've seen, The Walking Dead has been an incredible success from comic book to TV show to games, and Invincible
Yes.
as well. And I know that there's an Invincible video game in the works somewhere.
Mhm.
So I like the idea of thinking them all together. But I do think that video games really are the new comic book for our generation. And the only challenge there is that one person can write a comic book. But it's hard today for one person to make a video game. They're very expensive and their high production value. So sometimes a comic book is a better way to sort of build your world and your story and your characters. That being said, I am very excited about some of the new no-code creation tools and AI, and even just Unity and Unreal Engine that are allowing smaller teams to do the work of larger teams. So maybe the pendulum will swing the other way. But I do love some of these new creators I'm seeing who are working on a video game and a comic book at the same time.
Video game and a comic book at the same time.
Yes, yes. They'll use the comic book to flesh out the characters and the backstory in the world, and then use that as a guide for making a video game. I've seen a few startups who are doing that. I guess I can't really talk about them now, but it's very exciting. I even saw one comic book from Europe where the video game company actually hired the comic book creators as co-founders of their game studio. So
I
they're working. I can't name the product right now, but I'm very excited about what they're doing.
truly understandable, sir. The reason I was asking about games, actually, video games becoming the primary medium is because I've been following Fortnite for some amount of time, and Roblox.
Yeah.
So what I was pretty much amazed to see, because despite having my education in accountancy, I got the chance to be exposed to strategy planning that got me into the brand strategy side of things. And knowing the target audience of Fortnite and Roblox, what I was really amazed to see is that how they are actually introducing superhero characters
Yeah.
to younger audiences who may not have picked up a comic book, who may not have watched the animated series that made these characters popular. And that's why, I mean, I just had this notion, but obviously you have been involved with the gaming industry from the inside out. You still believe that the future is going to be shared between mediums rather than one medium leading the way.
I do think so. And I think we're also going to see a blending of mediums as well. I don't want to get off onto a discussion about the metaverse, but I think what we're going to see in the next few years is tools making it easier and easier for people to create games
Right.
and build their own vision. And that is going to unleash a whole new world of talent. And again, I mean, I think about, again, games all used to be coming from either Silicon Valley or Tokyo, and
Yes.
then maybe a little bit more from Europe. And now they're truly global, right? We're playing games from Finland, from Poland, and I'm very, very excited about the games that are going to be coming out of the Middle East.
True.
To be quite fair, Hollywood has not been kind to Saudi Arabia and the Middle Eastern region because it's outsiders telling their story. And I'm
Yes.
very excited about, Saudi game developers, of course, telling, stories from their own history and their own culture, but also superhero stories, created in Saudi Arabia, or adventure stories, or the next cyberpunk that will be coming from a wider variety of cultures and backgrounds. And I think it'll be a better way to share the very rich history and culture of the region. But as far as superheroes go, the game that broke my heart was City of Heroes, because it was an MMO where everybody got to be their own superhero. And it was just, bad luck. It never really found a publisher that could get behind it in a big way. And then I think Marvel Comics or DC ended up suing them for some copyright infringement.
Right.
But there's something about being a superhero that every kid loves, right? We all dream about being Spider-Man or Superman or Batman. It's just something about growing up. And some of us, like you and me, we still keep that spirit. I think that'll never go away. But I think what's going to happen is, they call it convergence, right? All of these mediums are coming together,
Right.
and the tools that you use to create a comic book, or excuse me, the tools that you use to create a video game, you can turn around and use those 3D models to make a comic book or even to make a film. So once you've gone through the effort of making them from one medium, it'll be much easier. I've even seen tools now where you can draw a 2D character and
Right.
the AI tool will turn it into a 3D animated character. That's how easy it will be to be making a video game in a few more years.
I have to endorse that point, sir, because I am uh, in our childhood days, when for us Gen Xers, when we thought of developing a video game, we were told that it requires programming, and the moment we saw programming, it was like this entire abyss of programming language. And now I see 8-year olds actually going onto the internet and developing their own simple versions of games.
Mhm.
So that is pretty much accurate, of the times we are in. With respect to Saudi Arabia, I do want to highlight that I'm sure you did come across something, but before that, I want to ask you a question, which might be a little bit of a how should I say, an unexpected one, if you will.
Okay.
Because you were involved with Fortnite and the entire mode of play of Fortnite, did the Fortnite team ever mention a a project that was undertaken by Marvel and EA Sports back in 2003, which would have been the open world New York City, and the Marvel heroes and the villains would be just duking it out, but it never saw the light of day.
No, no, that wasn't one that we had really ever heard of. I mean, Fortnite started as a game jam. It was
Right,
just a sort of a random idea. And again, there were a couple of things about Fortnite, just technical things, right? Because Epic has always been a technically amazing company. The ability to sort of pick up objects in the world and put them together and then have the physics work was something at both Xbox and at Sega. Two separate teams had come up with the same concept.
right,
They both came back and they said, we can't build it. Like the idea is there, but the technology isn't there.
right,
And by the time, I was starting to talk to the people at Epic, that had already been built. And I go, wait a second. This is already in there. Something two world-class teams tried to build and failed, and this team had already built. So I was very excited about it. But that being said, I had nothing to do with the success of the Battle Royale and the Fortnite world. That was a completely original idea. My only real creative input to the team was to understand that there's a group of young people who are going to be aging out of Minecraft and Roblox and looking for another game to play.
right,
They're not ready for Call of Duty or
right,
Gears of War. And
right.
let's find a game for those kids. That was sort of the limit of my creative input. Everything else was up to the team and on their own. But no, I really don't think that was what inspired it. And if the game itself really, to its credit, has evolved so much over time.
No doubt.
It started out as almost a PvP co-op, and then the PvP mode came, and then it grew, and then this vision for the metaverse has grown into it. So, um, they started out maybe a little lucky,
Right.
but everything they've done since then has been just amazingly thoughtful foresight into building a game for what really is a larger vision of the metaverse.
Larger vision of the metaverse. Okay. Now I am going to be discussing things with you about the Saudi gaming industry. You've had first-hand experience, and one of the things that you mentioned while you were talking about Saudi Arabia telling its own stories. First of all, I want to ask you, what's your take on Saudi Manga that joined forces with Japanese developers to launch Grendizer Mazinger game for PlayStation?
So I'm super excited. I think that's the work that the Manga Productions and the Misk Foundation has done,
Yeah.
and it's incredible. I loved Mazinger. I've played the game. I haven't seen the new anime yet, but even before that, I watched the anime called, I think it was called The Journey, and it,
Okay.
it told a story from the early history of Saudi Arabia.
Yes. The
It was
journey.
sort of they created sort of a backstory for a character that existed. It really opened my eyes. I mean, it was a wonderful story as well. And I guess I watched it for 90 minutes, and then I spent like 3 hours on Wikipedia, just what happened here? Was there really a battle of the elephants? What happened? Who was this king? And I mean, honestly, I learned a lot about the history and the culture of the region that I never would have been opened to had it not been for that anime.
No doubt.
Uh, so it was really, really amazing. And that really opened my eyes to how much talent there is and how much depth there is to explore.
Indeed. And as someone born and raised in the country, the kind of production, the kind of quality that I am experiencing, which is the content that's being published on Netflix from Saudi Arabia, it is giving a great deal of hope. But from a gamer's perspective, the moment I came across this Mazinger slash Grendizer video game by Manga Comics and Misk, that was like uh, that moment where you just say, man, things are now heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because in the 80s and the 70s, Saudi Arabia, until 1982, Saudi Arabia only had one TV channel.
Wow.
So that TV channel would be showing us the best of the Japanese animated pop culture and the American animated pop culture. So Grendizer is like, if you grew up in that era, if you were born in that era, and if you say that I don't like Grendizer slash Mazinger, you are an outcast immediately to this. And then once we started to have the second channel that was launched in 1982, things just expanded like crazy for all of us. So that is it. But you had the opportunity to check out the esport area in Comic Con Arabia. You had the chance to follow the developments in Tekken 8. You also mentioned the team captain Arslan Ash from Pakistan, who
Yeah.
won the Tekken tournament, whose team won the tournament, and also the Saudi team that won the Overwatch
That was
championship.
fantastic. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So what do you see now for Saudi Arabia where it's at? Because already the size of the industry in Saudi Arabia has crossed the $1 billion mark already.
So I think that it's working. It's really exciting for me at a lot of levels. Obviously, at the highest level, the leaders in government are investing in games and developing the industry, but also at the grassroots level, the the indie game developers and the students who are studying game design are just an amazing group of talented men and women who I think are this next generation. And I'm super impressed with both the technical talent, the creative talent, but also just like the sophistication. When I was hosting workshops and I'd ask people to tell me stories about the games that touch their heart,
Right.
I mean, usually you usually expect, hey, okay, Final Fantasy VII or Last of Us or God of War. But no, no. I mean, really deep, thoughtful, artistic games. I mean, a lot of the people there had a deeper, richer knowledge of games than I did. So I think that combination of the support from government and industry at the top level, education, and then a generation of young people who've just grown up loving and playing games. It's the perfect combination, I think, for this region to be a real cultural and thought leader for the
Right.
generation ahead. And here's the thing. It is great to see the esports champions, but I want to see people telling their own story.
Yeah.
And I think that's starting to happen. And I'm going to be even more excited to see as some of those visions come to life. And again, I'm not just talking about, the traditional stories of whatever 1001 Nights or Sinbad. No, no, no. I'm talking about, you know, uh, deeper history, or again, even science fiction from Saudi Arabia or fantasy from Saudi Arabia, those original stories, because the talent is there,
Yeah.
but this is the first time there's been the opportunity on top of it.
I think somebody, I hope they are watching this interview of yours, because one of the most mystical recent production that became a super hit on Netflix, it's called The Book of Sun. I hope they develop a game one day, which is a Saudi production. The Arabic name is Shams al Ma'arif.
Hmm.
If anyone is like interested into the mystical aspects like Doctor Strange and Doctor Fate and all that sort of thing, but it's a comedy, but it can, become a game. Uh, Mike, I want to thank you on behalf of the community that you took out the time to talk to us, to share your journey with us, to share your hopes and expectations about the country as well as the entire gaming industry itself. One final question, and after that, the closing remarks.
Sure, sure.
Mike, when are you coming to Saudi Arabia next time?
The door's open. Like I said, I was there last year 3 times. I've been to the Gamers 8 event in Riyadh. I've been to Dammam, Riyadh, and Jeddah. I was there for the Red Sea Film Festival. I would love to come again. It's such a beautiful, wonderful country. The hospitality of the people there is just amazing. And I know some of the biggest games in the world are going to be coming from Saudi Arabia soon. I
Yeah.
just don't know which team. So I'm going to be nice and helpful to everybody, because sooner or later, one of them is going to be the next Kojima, the next Miyamoto, the next superstar that plays games the world enjoys.
With that, I would like to bring this interview to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, superhero fans alike, you just listened to a professional who took the radical route, similar to what Steve Jobs had done in his area, similar to what Bill Gates had done in his area, by choosing to become a professional in the gaming industry. And his story is inspiring, to say the least. If you believe in something, if you know where your heart is, go for it. And for proof, just rewind and watch the entire interview of Mike Fisher. Thank you so much,
Thank
Mike.
you for the kind
And
words.
I really look forward to meeting you again once, whenever you get a chance to visit Jeddah.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.